guys, welcome back to Planet Houseplants. Today we are doing how to take care of Monstera Deliciosa. Specifically Deliciosa. I don't have a lot of experience with other Monsteras other than Peru, Adansonii, and this one. So I don't know what it is. It's just oh, it's very, very dry. If you're not that interested in plant care but you want a really big decor plant item, I don't think you can go far wrong with Monstera Deliciosa. I know fiddly figs are in, what's the other one? Palms. But Monstera Deliciosa want to live and they don't want to die. Fiddly fig, they're just looking for a way to die. They're waiting for you to mess up. Whether you forget to water, or you're 20 minutes late with the water, or you, God forbid, you move it. That's what they're waiting for. Monstera Deliciosa, they want you to succeed. And if you get everything right, they grow really, really quickly, and they're really rewarding to grow. So the first thing we're going to cover is light, and I think with Monstera it is the most important thing. With Calathea I think it's probably humidity, but with Monstera it's light. Monstera are commonly sold as a low light loving plant. No, not loving, but a plant you can put in low light, and you can. And I've seen plenty of people that are growing thriving Monstera in low light places. But that isn't the rule, that's the exception. If you want a big Monstera, give it loads of light. As much light as you can. I mean, I'm not saying go and shove it out in the bright sunshine because it will burn. You need to acclimatise them properly to bright light by just moving them in and out. But the more light you give them, the bigger they will grow. And that is just a fact. And they do come from the rainforest. And when they're juvenile, they live on the ground. But they use other trees to grow up. And the bigger they grow, the bigger their leaves grow as they grow towards the light. So there's no point in them having big leaves when they're little because they don't have the energy to sustain them. But as they grow up and they get more light, then they grow the bigger leaves. And in order to let the light penetrate to the lower leaves and keep them alive, they get the holes in the fenestrations. So if you have a Monstera in a dark place and it's growing but you're not getting those big fenestrated leaves, it's not that there's anything wrong with the plant. It's happy and it's healthy. But it's not going to grow big leaves with fenestrations in for no reason. The fenestrations are there to let the light through and also to let wind pass through at higher altitudes. If you're not providing it with light in higher altitudes, there's no reason for it to have the splits in the leaves. In lower light places, it makes sense for the Monstera not to have the fenestrations because the bigger the leaf, the bigger the surface area, the more chlorophyll, the more energy it can get from light. So, from the limited light that there is. So, unless you give it a lot of light, you're unlikely, I'm not saying you're not gonna, but you're unlikely to get those big mature leaves because there's just no point in the plant growing them. Right, so second we have temperature. Cold weather will kill your Monstera, frost will kill it, but they tend to be more tolerant of cold temperatures than a lot of other tropical plants. So if you have a drafty window, it might be okay. You might get like brown spots on it, but it won't kill the whole plant dead overnight. If you do start seeing temperature damage, which tends to be like dark spots, then I would move the plant. But in general, you can keep them out longer than they can get colder than other plants. So if you left your plant out overnight and you forgot about it, it would probably be okay and not really be that bothered. I mean, don't make a habit of it, but they're pretty forgiving. Next up we have humidity. Again, pretty forgiving. Ideally, we're looking at 50% humidity, maybe a little bit more, 50-60%. Too much humidity and you can end up with the leaves rotting as they unfurl. And if you're an overwaterer, then you're doubly likely to have that happen because Monstera are big on guttation, which is where they take up too much water from the roots and they force excess water out through the leaf. And if there's a lot of water hanging around in the leaves whilst they're still unfurling, then it can create a little microclimate inside the plant and rot it. So we don't want too much humidity. If your humidity is super low, that can cause a few crispy tips on the plants. I've not seen that so much. Maybe, I mean, it could happen if you had like really low humidity, like under 20%. But in general, once a Monstera leaf is out and fully hardened off, they're fairly thick and sort of hardy. But when the Monstera leaves are new and they're still like that really vibrant bright green and still really soft, that is when lack of humidity will affect them. Oh, and another note, when they're unfurling and they're still, or anytime they're still at that bright green stage, don't touch them. This is very much a case of do as I say, not as I do, because I can't leave them alone, but you can mark them so easily. If you notice that your Monstera is having trouble with its leaves unfurling, so in general how long it takes for leaves to unfurl does vary. I'm going to say 2 weeks, but it varies a lot. But if you think that it's been too long, if you up the humidity, that can help the leaves unfurl, but just make sure that you're not overwatering it, because as I said, you can cause the new leaves to rot. When it comes to watering, I have found that Monstera like a lot of water and then to be left to completely dry out and then water them again, rather than a little bit of water quite often. But having said that, they're not that fussy. I've just found that's how you can get them to grow quickest. So I soak mine and then leave them. I would say I water mine every month, but it really varies. It's quite big and it's in a terracotta pot. It's not in here anymore. When it comes to soil mix, I don't think I've ever seen a plant that cares less. Ideally, you want a really airy mix, or you could just buy regular houseplant potting mix and put some orchid bark in it. Just a bit of airflow to the roots, because they are epiphytes, so that's not true. I believe they're semi-epiphytic. So some of their roots are outside and some of the roots are inside, in the ground. But I mean, I've kept Monstera in really dense, like, soil that's meant for outside plant, like really dense, and they have been fine. But as an underwaterer, that was probably my saving grace. If you're an overwaterer, you're going to want something that dries out quickly, or just stop being an overwaterer. But I know that's easier said than done. So generally more water at one time but less often is what they like. When it comes to water quality, again, I really don't think they care. Mine are watered with tap water, always have been. I've also watered them with water that was far too cold. I have watered, they don't care, that I'm aware of. The thing that really makes them grow quickly is light, and it has a phenomenal effect on them, whereas nothing else really seems to. So that's really the secret. Pests. It's thrips. I've seen Monstera with mealybugs and spider mites and stuff, but I've never had that happen to mine. But I've also never known my Monstera not have at least one thrip on it all the time. Thrips damage the plant. They damage the leaves. They suck the chlorophyll out, so you see like these little yellow patches on them. But as long as you keep tabs on them, they're unlikely to kill a Monstera. They may make it look crap, but they're not. I don't want you to notice that there's thrips on your Monstera and think, right, I'm just going to chuck it out. Isolate it, and just keep wiping the leaves down, and 9 times out of 10 they're fine. Every week I just put mine in the shower and hose off the leaves, and that makes sure that the larvae aren't growing into adults and reproducing. So I've always got a low level amount. Another tip for this, I've not seen anybody else mention this, but it's what I do. If you have an area of damage on your Monstera, don't top it off, because thrips like damaged areas of plants. I don't know if it's because it's easier for them to get the chlorophyll out, but it's a good way to sort of herd them. So if I'm checking the plant for thrips, I always check the damaged areas, because it's where the thrips like to go. So if you have an area of damage, that's the place you need to concentrate on when you're washing them off. And I'm not saying they'll all be there, but it's a good place for them to congregate. So it's a good place to sort of keep tabs on. Did that make any sense? I feel like it didn't. Propagation. Monstera are one of the only plants I would propagate by just taking cuttings and sticking them straight in the soil. They're really easy to propagate. They tend to not rot. Even if they take a while to develop roots, the actual cuttings are fairly hardy. You will need a node. You can't grow a new plant from a leaf cutting without a node. The leaf cutting may well grow roots, so if you have a nice Monstera leaf and it doesn't have a node that you can get to, but you want to keep it in a vase, you can do that, and you can keep them alive quite a long time as long as you keep changing the water. They will grow roots, and that will sustain the leaf for a while, but it won't grow into another plant. The nodes are just they're like bobbly bits on the stem. That's often where the aerial root comes from, and you just want to chop just below the aerial root and put it in water, put it in leca, put it back in the soil like I said, and after a while it will grow new roots, and then it will start to grow new leaves. A common tip for if you want a bushier plant is to take cuttings and put them back in the soil, and that is how I grew my current Monstera. But I wouldn't necessarily advise it, just because Monstera roots are massive. They grow really quickly and they won't. Monstera are one of those plants that like to be snug in their pot. But also if you put it in a pot that's too big, if you overwater it, it will die, like most plants will. But if you put it in a pot that's far too big, and if you keep perfectly on top of the watering so that it doesn't rot, it will spend the next however long of its life filling that pot with roots, and it will not produce any more leaves. So if you want your plant to grow well and grow quickly, keep it in its nursery pot as long as you can, and when you go to pot it up in a slightly bigger pot every time, because keeping it snug will encourage it to put out more leaves rather than roots. They love growing roots, and if you put multiples in pots together, don't ever expect to separate them out again. You can, but it is a nightmare. Like, they get so tangled up, and they just have a really extensive root system. So just beware that if you do pot multiple cuttings together, you will end up with a massive, massive plant, and you'll need a massive pot to put it in. I know, because I've got one. If you're interested in growing plants in leca, Monstera are a good one to start with. Did I start mine in... Yeah, I started all mine in water. I prefer starting them in water because I can see the roots better and I don't end up with leca everywhere. But they grow pretty well in leca, and you can either put a reservoir in straight away or do the shower method, which is where you don't put a reservoir in, you just shower it and let the water drain away. Because Monstera don't really seem to care. I have two growing in my aquarium and they're growing really well. I was actually growing one in just water for a blog article I was doing, but I'm not diligent enough about changing the water, so I ended up with a load of algae. But if you're looking to grow a plant in just water, Monstera are a good one to try. The only issue you may have is keeping it upright. Staking Monstera it's not necessary, but if you don't stake it, they tend to sort of splay out everywhere and they take up a lot of space. What you can do, if your plant's growing a lot of aerial roots, you can direct them back into the soil and that will prop it up and keep it growing upwards. Or you can attach it to a moss pole just to stake it up. Make sure when you do that you're staking the stem, not the petioles. So the stem is the bit in the middle with the nodes on. The petioles are the bit that attach the leaf to the stem. If you stake up the petioles, you just end up snapping them. Also, if you want your Monstera to grow up a moss pole, like to attach itself, don't use a moss pole. That sounds contradictory. Moss poles, I use moss poles to keep my plants upright and stake them, but I tie them on. I don't intend that they're going to latch on themselves because they won't. If you keep the moss pole damp, you can encourage the aerial roots to attach to the moss pole, but if it dries out, they'll let go again. So it's not really a permanent solution because you're constantly having to keep the moss pole wet, which is a pain. And when it comes to winter, it's almost impossible to keep the moss pole wet and not overwater the soil. So if you're wanting the plant to grow up something that it's going to attach to, it needs to grow up something that the plant thinks is a tree. So a plank of wood, because it's like a flat, hard surface. Moss isn't. It's not like sturdy enough for the Monstera to think that it's worth attaching itself to. If you keep it moist, then you can sort of trick it into thinking that it's a tree because it's moist, but the roots won't attach like properly, solidly. Other options are walls. So if you keep your Monstera next to a wall, don't be surprised if it decides to attach itself. And don't let it attach itself if you live in a rental, because it will take your paint off. It won't damage, that I'm aware of, it won't actually damage the walls, but it will damage the paintwork. So just to let you know. Can you put Monstera outside? Yes, and I would recommend it, depending on where you live. I've noticed new growth on Monstera after I've had them outside for like 8 hours. It's that quick. It has that much of an effect. I put mine in shadow? In the shade, you know what I mean. Just, the odd warm day. It doesn't even have to be outside for the whole summer. If there's a warm day, put it out and it just gives it that boost of energy. It's honestly shocking how much it has an effect. In winter, Monstera, my Monstera won't grow in winter, and I noticed it the first year I was really into houseplants. Then the following year, I did my best to convince it that it wasn't winter. So it was under grow lights. I kept it warm. What else? Kept the humidity up, but nothing. It knew it was winter, and it knew it shouldn't be grown in winter, even though they come from somewhere where they don't have winter. It knew, and it wouldn't grow. So last leaf comes out in October. We're not having a new leaf till March, and I don't know why it's decided this, but it has. And I also don't know if that's what they all do, but that's what mine does. So if yours isn't growing in winter, then maybe it's fine. But keep an eye. If you notice your Monstera has root rot and is dying, I would definitely go down the route of taking all the soil off and putting it in water. They do seem to like living in water, or at least being rehabbed in water, so that is probably what I would tend to do. That seems to be something that works well with plants that like to dry out. Plants like peace lilies. You can keep peace lilies in water, but it's not like something that is guaranteed to revive it. Not that it's guaranteed to revive a Monstera, but it's worked for me. Whereas with peace lilies, they look really, really sad really, really quickly, and you may have to wait a while for them to acclimatise. So my Monstera Deliciosa gets fertilised every 6 weeks with a general houseplant fertiliser, and it's fine. And I've never had any issues with it being hungry. In fact, the only plant I've ever had an issue with it being hungry is Monstera Adansonii. They go yellow. It looks like a weird yellow mottled pattern, and it looks a little bit like mosaic virus. In general, it's not like mosaic virus, as a sweeping statement. It's more likely to be something else. It could be, but chances are it isn't. So if you notice that your Monstera Adansonii is looking a little bit mottled and yellow, feed it. That it's the only plant that I'm confident that that's probably what it is. It could be thrips damage, but it's probably hungry. They just seem to be a really hungry plant in general. But then they do grow quite quickly, and they grow, or my Monstera Adansonii anyway, they grow from multiple growth points a lot. So at any one time your plant might be putting out 5 leaves. Like, no wonder it's hungry. Whereas Monstera Deliciosa, no, they tend to do one at a time. Even if you've got multiple growth points, they tend to do one at a time. Again, that I've noticed. This Monstera is a Monstera that I can't say the other. It's Friedrichstaffelii. But if you Google that, it just comes up with Adansonii. So I don't know if it's just another name for Adansonii and this is something completely different. But this I don't treat like a Monstera. I treat it like a pothos. I'm trying to think of how I treat those two differently, other than it doesn't go outside. But I don't think this is ever going to grow massive, cool leaves. It might. I'll give it a chance. Monstera guttate a lot. If you ever pick one up and carry it, it will drip on you. They always seem to be guttating, whether they're overwatered or not. They also love to have damaged leaves. I think it's just the size of them, because the leaves are so big. It could be fungus, it could be overwatering, it could be underwatering, it could be thrips damage, it could be lack of humidity, but it's probably not. They tend to just sag a bit when it's lack of humidity, or not grow properly, rather than the actual leaves being damaged. I don't know how widespread this sort of thought is. If a Monstera grows a leaf without fenestrations, that is how the leaf is. Once the leaf has emerged, once it's unfurled, it will grow. Like, they do grow quite a lot once they're unfurled, but they won't develop fenestrations. The fenestrations are there once when it's in its little, when it's filled up. So they won't do that. The fenestrations are something that come with age and light. I have seen them grown in dark places, or their owners have said that they've grown them in dark places and they've got fenestrations. But if you want to guarantee fenestrations, you need to make sure it's old enough. General consensus is around 2 years old, but again, it will depend on how much light it's had in those 2 years. But if you want it to grow fenestrations, it needs a hell of a lot of light, like a hell of a lot, which is why I put mine outside. Other than that, it's just time and general care. You want to keep it watered and fed and stuff, but they're not that picky with that stuff. It's the light. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's that you need to put your Monstera in bright light if you want the fenestrations. And there will be people going, yeah, but it'll burn. Yeah, it will. If you don't acclimatise it properly, or if you put it in too bright of a light, like, could it happen in here? I've never had it happen here, and it's been pretty hot. But as long as you keep it, if you live somewhere where the sun is really hot, put it in the shade, but outside still. But you see them growing up trees in like Florida and stuff, and their leaves are massive, but they've got brown bits on them from where the sun's burnt them. The plant isn't that bothered about the way that it looks. all it cares about is growing. They don't care about, you know, the odd brown bit. Who cares? The other Monstera I have is Monstera Peru. I hate it. It doesn't grow properly. It's really dusty. It always has thrips, and it won't propagate. Is it just me? I've tried it a million times. It's currently in my area garden. So mine took a real detour and lost nearly all its leaves. And what I did was I pinned the stem back into the soil. I'd taken leaf cuttings and tried to root leaf cuttings in soil. Didn't take. But if you get a bit of stem that's still attached to the roots and pin that into the soil, I have got it to root that way, but the stem has to still be attached to the roots. So if you're struggling, then that is what I found to work. The thing about Monstera Peru is they're not the same as obviously they're not the same as Monstera Deliciosa, but they burn really, really easily. So I had mine under grow lights and it burnt. So I'm gonna try it outside in the summer, keep it in the shade and just see how it does. And I've also found that they hate being overwatered, but they go from being like moist to being bone dry literally overnight. So you really have to keep an eye on them, and that's really not something that I'm good at. So mine was never gonna thrive. It's doing okay now. I've tried it everywhere for like a significant amount of time, and I think I had it somewhere where it didn't like it for too long. I might have to get another one. I don't know if I've this is the thing with plants, you don't know if you just got a dodgy one or one that had root rot or something and was brought back to health and was just weakened by that. So yeah, if you're not that into plants and you don't care about the big fenestrated leaves, Monstera, as long as you don't overwater them or underwater them, although it's quite hard to underwater them, even if you put up a reminder on your phone to water your Monstera every month, it'll probably be okay. If you want to water it every week, put it in a terracotta pot, it'll probably be okay. Especially if you put it in a really airy soil. I hope I can edit this into something that's actually watchable. But anyway, I hope that there was something in here that you found useful. It's still frosty net here, so it can't go out yet, but I'm gonna keep my Monstera out this summer. If I can, it really depends on the weather, obviously. And I will document it, and because I know how much it grew last year from being inside, I will be able to sort of tell you definitively how much it helps, but I'm confident it will help a lot. So yeah. If you're interested in growing your Monstera up a plank and letting the aerial roots grow, there is a YouTuber called Caitlin. I'll link her channel below, but she's an expert on all this stuff, whereas I'm just an enthusiastic amateur. But she's had like really quick results with a plank of wood and some sellotape. It was really quite inspiring. And she also grows all her plants at walls, and it looks incredible. I can't do that because my landlady would not be happy. So I can't do that, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, I hope this was useful, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.